Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Rachel, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of February. February was another very good month. I have to say, 2 months in, I have done quite a bit of reading, quite a bit more than I did last year at this point. I read 16 books this month, and I also read 16 books in January, so we are at 32 books for the year. Feeling really, really good about that, and I have to say, I had 4 5-stars this month. One of them was a reread, but I'm glad that book hit well on a reread, and I just read a ton of amazing books this month. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let me tell you guys all about the books I read in February and what I thought of them. All right, so the first 2 books that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about them together. I didn't read them together, but you'll see why I want to discuss them at the same time, and that is Flawless and Powerless by Elsie Silver. So this is the first and the third book in the Chestnut Springs series by Elsie Silver, which is a small town romance series. I read the second book in the series, Heartless, last year, and it was one of my favorite books of 2022. Oh my god, loved it so much. I decided to go back and read the first book in the series. You don't have to read them in order. It is like a companion series. Probably better to do so, but I decided to read them out of order. So I wanted to go back and read the first book in anticipation for the third book, Powerless, which came out on February 10th. So the first book is Flawless, and it is an enemies to lovers small town romance. Our main character's father is kind of like the PR person for this bull rider named Rhett. He has kind of a bad reputation, and so he enlists the help of his daughter to kind of get him in line. She goes with him everywhere. She makes sure that he doesn't like do anything to embarrass himself in the media anymore. She actually ends up moving into his house, so they are spending a ton of time together, and a romance blossoms from there. This book was really solid. It's a solid start to the series. I will say it is like my least favorite, I think, of the 3 books in the series that are out so far. Not bad at all, but I think just in comparison, they're just not Cade and Willa. You know what I mean? Like, I do think maybe reading Heartless first made me potentially favorite them, but I also just think that book is just like god tier romance for me. So this was a solid start to the series, definitely loved it, and it was cool to kind of go back to the beginning where the series started, but I ended up rating this one 4 stars. And then, as I said, the third book in the series, Powerless, came out February 10th, and this was so good. Oh my god. So this follows Jasper and Sloane. Jasper is a hockey player, Sloane is a ballet dancer. This book has the childhood friends to lovers trope, and Sloane is actually engaged to the worst person on earth. Honestly, he sucks. But Jasper, even though he does not like this guy, he is supportive of Sloane, but something happens on her wedding day and she has to go. She has to be the runaway bride. Jasper is there to come to the rescue and whisk her away, and the 2 of them end up going on a road trip together, and they do a lot of healing and they fall in love, and this book was just absolutely fantastic. I gave this book 5 stars. It definitely has, in my opinion, a bit of a different tone than Flawless and Heartless. Those books were a little bit more lighthearted. This was a little bit heavier. There's definitely a big emphasis on mental health and how important that is, specifically with Jasper's character, which I really enjoyed. He is such the tortured hero, which is one of my favorites in a romance novel, so I really liked seeing his journey. And also Sloane deals with being a people pleaser and having people walk all over her, so she does have to stand up for herself, and we see her kind of go through that in this book. Also, their romance was just top tier. The spice was wonderful because Elsie Silver is incredible at writing spice, in my opinion, and I definitely think that this is my second favorite in the series. I still love Willa and Cade just a little bit more, the couple in Heartless, but this is a very close second. The 2 books just feel a little bit different tone-wise, so still definitely a super solid installment to the series. The next book that I read in February was Before We Were Strangers by Renee Carlino. This is a second chance romance that spans over the timeline of 15 years. Our 2 main characters went to NYU together. They had a whirlwind year of falling in love, but then something happened that separated them, and you know, some things happened, some miscommunication occurred, and they don't end up being together, but they end up seeing each other in the subway in New York City, and so that kind of just reignites this connection, and they see if they can make it work so many years later. This book was very interesting. I feel extremely conflicting feelings about it. There were parts of this book that I loved and I was like here for, and there were parts of this book that made me so mad that I wanted to throw it across the room. So it's a hard book to talk about. The things that I loved, particularly, I really enjoyed getting to see their year of falling in love at NYU. It was very fun, and this author did a great job of making New York City kind of be one of the characters in this book, which is something I really appreciate in all types of media, whether it's movies, TV show, or in a book. I like when the city just kind of feels a part of the narrative, so that was enjoyable. And the 2 of them, they were very cute when they were young. They were immature and didn't always say or do the right things, but it was just nice to see kind of this raw, real, imperfect couple kind of navigate their way through college and and love. The reason that these two ended up kind of losing connection and not talking to each other anymore was frustrating, I will say. And then kind of the big plot twist in this book, I still don't know how I feel about it, to be honest with you. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. My biggest disappointment within this book though is the ending of this book was very rushed. So the portion of the book when, hey, it's 15 years later, let's see if we can make this relationship work. We have, you know, kind of new situations happening. Let's see what we can do. Felt extremely rushed and quick. And I just don't really feel like we got to spend enough time with these characters as older adults and seeing what their lives were like and how they could make it work. The author did a really great job of establishing who they were when they were younger. We spent a lot of time with them. We got to see all these different little events in their life. And then I feel like when they were older, it was pretty quick and rushed. And I just don't think that it did the relationship service. So overall, I think I gave this book like a 3 or a 3.5, and that feels right. It's a book that like I enjoyed, but I don't necessarily know if I like recommend, because I can definitely see why people would be irritated with these two. I will say though, it was an enjoyable reading experience overall. I just felt a lot of emotions reading this book. Okay, so the next book, a part of my February wrap up, is going to be An Optimist Guide to Heartbreak by Jennifer Hartman. I was unfortunately pretty disappointed by this book. I went in with very, very high hopes, but this book really did not work for me. So this is Grumpy Sunshine, and it's also Childhood Friends to Lovers. Our two main characters grew up next door to each other, had a very idyllic childhood, and tragedy strikes when they are teenagers and they end up losing connection, and it really does destroy both of them in different ways and their families and all of that. But many years later, our main character, I think her name is Lucy, she ends up moving back to their hometown, and our love interest Cal is there, and he runs an auto body shop, and the two of them try to see if there is any either friendship or relationship that can be salvaged between the two of them after they have gone through so much. So some of the things that I did not love about this book: number one, it is a Grumpy Sunshine novel, and I just feel like for me personally, the sunshine aspect in a Grumpy Sunshine dynamic has to be done very well, and I feel like our main character Lucy, she was very immature. She read childish at times, and I don't like that. I love a sunshine bubbly positive character completely, but I still want them to feel like an adult and not feel young and immature, and just, I don't know, she felt a little bit over the top for me, and I did not connect with her, unfortunately. And then the dynamic between these two was very interesting and just not a dynamic that I enjoyed. It's hard for me to talk at great length what I did not like about this book without getting into spoiler land, but I'll try to navigate this a little bit. Basically, the two of them could not be together for numerous reasons, and whenever Lucy would tell Cal, like, we can't be together, she wouldn't tell him why, because, you know, she kind of has this big secret. And then whenever he would just kind of like go along with that or respect that or say okay, or he would have his own reasons that he can't be with her, she would like get mad at him. So I feel like there was a lot of conflicting what she was saying and then what her internal monologue was. I didn't like that. That also felt immature. It felt like, why are you here? Why did you come into Cal's life if you are going to shut him down in different ways? And I just didn't really understand it. I also think that Cal, he has been through a lot of trauma, which I totally respect and understand, but I do still think that he needs to be responsible for the way that he treats people. And I do think that he was a little bit cruel to Lucy at times. And this is one of those books that I'm kind of just like, I don't think that you two should be together. I understand the connection. I understand you guys went through something together. You grew up together. You're curious about each other. You want to see each other again. But there was so much miscommunication happening. And as I said, it just felt immature. It did not feel like two adults. It felt like, you know, secrets were being kept from one another, and one person would say, oh, I don't want to be with you. One person would say, I can't do relationships. And then they would get mad at each other, even though they're kind of thinking the same thing. And the plot twist at the end of this book was just not really for me. I don't know. And so once I finished this, I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to read the second book because this is a duology. So I looked up what happens in the second book, and I'm sorry, but no. Absolutely not. That makes me, I think I gave this a 2.5, and finding out what happens in the second book and then kind of applying that to what happens in the first book almost makes me want to lower this to just like a 2-star rating. I just don't like this book. I just don't think that these characters are very likable, and I love a messy relationship, don't get me wrong, but I just think it has to be done well and there has to be some maturity involved, and I just don't think that there was a lot of that going on here. The next book that I read in February was Restore Me by J.L. Seekers. So this is an enemies to lovers kind of forbidden romance. Our main character's husband tragically passes away, and she and her late husband's best friend have always kind of had had conflict and contention between one another even when her husband was still alive, but many years later they end up having to work on a project together. Their jobs bring them together, and there is definitely an attraction there, but also kind of hatred, and our main character doesn't really understand why does he hate me so much, but the truth is that the two have kind of been like low-key pining for each other, but wanting to fight that obviously. And we watch their relationship kind of go from being enemies, being really hard on each other, to forming a friendship and then falling for one another. I loved the tension in this book. Oh my god, the tension was palpable, you guys. J.L. Seegers can write tension. It was so much fun. I love the forbidden enemies to lovers romance trope. Like, that is just so incredible. And these two characters, there was a lot of emotion, there was a lot of heart, there was a lot of grief, and there was just so much kind of fiery energy between the two of them. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I really loved it, but I will say this book is very long, and I just feel like the aspects of this book that made it long were just kind of like mundane activities and conversations that I don't really think helped further the plot. I did find myself feeling like we could cut this part out. The flow of the novel is not, you know, on a good pace, on a good speed for me. So I think if this book was a little bit shorter, I might have enjoyed it more, but the moments where the romance was like hitting and the tension was there were fantastic. And I really like this author's writing style. There's I think a second book in this like series or duology, I'm not sure, but I do want to pick it up because I did like this author's writing style. I just think that this one was a little bit too long for me. All right, next up in my February wrap up is going to be Secretly Yours by Tessa Bailey. So this is your classic Tessa Bailey. It's a grumpy sunshine rom-com, and our two main characters are a bubbly gardener and then a stuffy professor who is on a sabbatical at home in Napa writing a novel, and the two of them end up meeting and, you know, forming a bit of a friendship, and they actually ended up going to high school together, but our love interest Julian actually doesn't remember Hallie, so there's a little bit kind of tension going on there. But this book was a little bit of a letdown for me. I like the way that Tessa Bailey writes rom-coms. I like the way she sets up her worlds. She does have funny moments and kind of this funny writing style that I enjoy, but I have to say, as far as a grumpy sunshine romance goes, this book just like lacked so much tension, and I just don't really feel like we had to work for anything. What I do like about Grumpy Sunshine, when it is done correctly, is these two different characters are very opposed, right? One is grumpy, one is sunshine. They have different personalities, and those aspects of their personalities make them clash a bit, make them kind of have a hard time getting to that relationship level, even though they're attracted to one another. It just makes it really fun. I feel like Julian and Hallie got along so well, so quickly. There was like zero buildup. So then it just kind of became a little bit boring for me. Fortunately, I think I gave this book 3 stars. It's not bad, but it's just not for me. It's just not a very exciting, tension-filled romance. And overall, I just thought it was like a very average reading experience. Okay, so not an average reading experience is a perfect way to describe my next book, and that is Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. I loved this. Oh my god. This is, okay, I'm just gonna say this right off the bat. This is my favorite rom-com of all time. God tier, top tier romantic comedy romance. I love Eve so much. I related to her so much. I just absolutely fell in love with her. Like 40 pages in, I was like, this is going to be a 5-star read for me. And I'm so happy that I picked this up. I read this book during kind of like my birthday week, and it was just like, what a wonderful way to cap off my birthday week with a 5-star romance. So our two main characters are Eve and Jacob. Eve is the youngest sibling in the Brown sisters, part of the Brown sisters trilogy, and she gets told by her parents like, hey, you need to act your age, you need to go off and like make something of yourself, you need to go start a career, or otherwise we are going to cut off your inheritance. So she realizes, okay, I gotta do something. I need to show my parents I'm serious about finding a career, and I need to find a career where I can grow. And she ends up kind of stumbling across this very beautiful and idyllic bed and breakfast in the English countryside, and kind of inadvertently ends up getting the job of the chef in this bed and breakfast. And the owner of this bed and breakfast, his name is Jacob. He's very blunt and he is very particular, and so the two of them really do butt heads because at first they seem very different, and the way that they do things is different. And because Jacob is so particular, at first he isn't so sure about Eve, but the two of them slowly start to fall for each other, and oh my god, this book is just absolutely everything. Reading this book was just such a joy and felt so magical and beautiful. I really liked seeing Eve's journey of self-discovery and also just sort of her her inner dialogue of how she feels about how her family perceives her, how she feels about how she, you know, wants to do better, she wants to grow as a person, but it can be difficult for her. I definitely related to that and I just love her so much. This book also does have autism representation and I really enjoyed learning more about Jacob and his backstory. I really loved the way that Talia Hibbert really rounded out these characters. We got to know them super well in 300 something pages. And the spice in this book was just like very good, very top tier, and it was just fun. It was witty, it was clever, it was funny. I just had such a fantastic time reading this. There were also just like beautifully written scenes. The scene by the pond when she describes how the moonlight looks washing over them, I was just like, this is gorgeous, this is stunning. This book is stunning. This is obviously a 5-star read. I annotated it and I just love this book so much. I think I will be rereading this in the future. It just feels like a comfort read and I love Eve and Jacob so much. All right, and then I did a 24-hour readathon with my friends and I was able to read 3 books during that readathon. The first one was Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This is a sapphic romance and it follows our 2 main characters are Delilah Green and Claire. So Delilah is kind of like the black sheep of her family. She grew up in a very small town but wanted to go out, be an artist, move to New York City. She ends up having to come back to her small town though because her stepsister is getting married and Delilah is asked to be the photographer. When she gets back there, she runs into Claire, who is actually her sister Astrid's best friend. They knew each other in high school but didn't really interact, and Claire doesn't realize that it's Delilah when she sees her and she's like so attracted to her and she's like, oh my god. So she like goes and hits on her and then realizes that it's Delilah and she's like, oh my god, this is my best friend's little sister. I've known this girl forever, like what? And the 2 of them, you know, kind of just fall for each other. This book was so much fun, so happy, just like purely serotonin in a book. I had such a wonderful time reading this. I really liked the audiobook as well. The small town aspects were very cute. There's also a focus on like female friendship and how important that is, which I really enjoyed. I love Astrid and Iris and Claire and Delilah all as besties. They are wonderful. Iris is my favorite. I do believe that she is getting a book in this series and I'm so excited to pick that up. And I really liked watching Claire and Delilah be there for each other, learn about each other. Claire is a single mom. Delilah ends up kind of helping her out and it's just a really sweet dynamic between the 2 of them and I just love them. Delilah and Claire are just everything. I gave this book 4 stars. The only reason that it wasn't a 5-star for me because it did feel like one for a while, but I do think that there was a bit, once again, a lack of tension. I feel like I say that anytime a romance is not a 5-star for me, but truly, I need tension, guys. I need tension, and Claire and Delilah, while they are both just wonderful characters separately and together, I do wish that there was like a little bit more of a struggle to get together. I'm a masochist, okay? I need our characters to go through it. I need it to be a little bit difficult for them to get together, and they did get along pretty quickly for me, but this is still such a solid book. I'm going to continue on with this series, and I'm excited just to read anything from this author in the future. All right, and then during that 24-hour readathon, I read A Not So Meet Cute by Megan Quinn. This book is pitched kind of as a spin, a rom-com spin on Pretty Woman. Our main character, she gets fired from her job and she's literally like walking through this really nice neighborhood in Beverly Hills and she comes across our love interest. He has actually kind of caught himself in a lie saying that he has a fiance and he wants to impress this client, so that's why he said it. He wanted to seem like a family man. And our female main character, she's like, hey, I just lost my job and I need to go to my like high school reunion in a few weeks and I just need to look like I have my stuff together because I really don't. And our male love interest is like, well, I really need to have a fiance and just impress my clients, so why don't we work together? They're both fully like aware of the fact that they are just manufacturing a relationship and fake dating so that they can both get what they want. I like the setup of this book, the execution not so much. I really did not like the writing in this book. Our main character Lottie, she read cartoonish. She read over the top, like beyond, in a way that I was like, I don't like this. I don't buy this person as a character. I just felt like it was really silly, goofy times happening in this book. And it just wasn't enjoyable for me. If I don't like the main character in a book, I'm just not going to enjoy it. And truly, like, that is my main criticism of this book. It's not bad, it's just not for me. I just don't like this cartoonish caricature of a character. So just not really a hit in the month. All right, and then I read a little known book that goes by the name of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have never read the Lord of the Rings trilogy or The Hobbit until this month, and I definitely made it a goal for myself that I wanted to read those books because I really love the Lord of the Rings movies and I just wanted to read Tolkien's work. I wanted to read kind of the OG fantasy author and see what I thought of his books. And I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I liked this book. There was an aspect of humor in Tolkien's writing that I really enjoyed. It was cool to like see the Hobbit story. It was cool to see what, you know, the origins, and my biggest thing was I really did expect for this book to feel magical and for me to feel really transported. Like when I read a fantasy, the biggest thing for me is like, I want to feel like I'm in this world. I want the escapism to be turned up to 11. And for me, I just didn't really ever like get there with this book. It was like fine, I enjoyed it, but I just didn't really feel that like magical, transported, I'm in another world feeling when I read this. So I feel bad. I'm sorry. I know that Tolkien is like Tolkien. I didn't really love this book. I didn't hate it either. It was just like a very fine reading experience. I'm glad I read it. I am going to read The Lord of the Rings as well. This was just perfectly fine. All right, and then I participated in the Romantasy Readathon, which was hosted by Tori at Tori Between Pages, and I read 3 books for this readathon. The first book that I read was Blood of Desiderium by Ali Steb. This book follows a Fae princess who isn't allowed to use her magic, even though everyone else in the kingdom does. She unfortunately lives with her very emotionally and physically abusive father, and one day she sneaks out of the castle and she's exploring the village when she comes to find that there is kind of a bit of a curse happening in their kingdom, and she ends up running into this masked, very intriguing, sort of like mercenary assassin type, and our main character realizes that she wants to find out like what is going on in the kingdom, and the story kind of takes off from there. Here's my thing with this book. This is a new adult fantasy romance. I also want to say check trigger warnings before you pick this book up if you're interested. It is a dark fantasy romance, and there are definitely dark elements not only with the romance but just with the story as a whole. But this book was so long. It was 600 pages, which like, I don't mind a fantasy or a fantasy romance being 600 pages. It has been done before and I've enjoyed it before. The romance in this book, all the romantic aspects were done so well. It was so much fun. There are definitely some like spicy scenes that I was like, oh my God, really into having a good time. The problem is what made this book so long was our main character would just go on these like monologues talking about her thoughts and her feelings and just kind of repeating that a lot, which I don't mind. I like getting to know our character. I like a character-driven story, but there wasn't like a lot of actual dialogue in this book. I came to realize by the end of the book, I was like, I don't feel like enough conversation happened, which I think just made the book a little bit boring. And a lot of that inner monologue that our main character was doing wasn't necessarily narrating like, oh, what's happening in front of me, more just her being like introspective while things were going on. And it just wasn't very entertaining. So the romance was so good. I genuinely think if this book was like 150 or 200 pages shorter, which I know is a lot, but I think it would have been like a 4-star for me. Like, I think that this book could have been so much better. I just think it needed to be like cut down a little bit. There was just too much inner monologue, introspection, not enough like action and conversation, and things just to keep the novel exciting. So I gave this book a 3-star rating. I also read Court of Ravens and Ruin by Eliza Reign. This is once again a Fae fantasy romance, and our main character, she's a member of the Gold Court. She ends up getting kidnapped by the Dark Prince of the Shadow Court, and this is a book that has a lot of Norse mythology influence, which was really cool to read about. This is a fantasy romance where it's pretty surface level. There's not very good world building in this book, and we don't get too deep on like magic systems or anything like that. I just feel like the entire book was pretty surface level. There's also not like a ton of spice in this book, which is like fine, but like, you know, not my preferred. I gave this book like 3 stars. It's a book that like I probably won't really ever think about again. I enjoyed aspects of it, but just not a book that has a lasting impression, and we didn't really dive too deep into it. And the last book that I read for that Romantasy Readathon was A Dawn of Onyx by Kate Golden. This is the first book in a new adult fantasy romance trilogy, I believe. Our main character's name is Arwen. She is a healer, and she lives in this world where the kingdom is divided up by like onyx and amber and pearl and peridot, and just all of these different kingdoms are kind of divided up by gemstones, and the lands kind of resemble those gemstones. So it's a pretty cool world that Kate Golden has built, and our main character Arwen ends up getting kidnapped by the soldiers of the Onyx Kingdom. And the Onyx Kingdom, they're the big bad guys. They have actually declared war against the Amber Kingdom, and Amber is always very confused by this because they're like, we don't really have anything that you guys want. You guys are way more powerful than us. Why are you doing this? And first Arwen is taken prisoner, and she ends up meeting a very mysterious, handsome, dark prisoner who is next to her in his cell. And in order for Arwen to make it out of enemy territory, she is going to have to really pay attention to her own powers and harness those. And she sort of just gets involved in things going on within the castle, and things take off from there. This book was so much fun. Oh my God. In the beginning, like the first like 100 pages, I was like, okay, yeah, this is cute. I don't really know how I feel. But once you hit like the 100 or like 120 page mark, this is just such an amazing enemies to lovers fantasy romance. The love interest in this book, I love him. He is on the book boyfriend roster now, and I am so excited to see what these two do in the future in this series. But this book just had a lot of tension, a lot of fun moments between them, and we also had really fun side characters. There's a little bit of found family going on. There is also this element of Fae, which I love. love. You guys know I love fae, and I just think that this was a very solid first book in a fantasy romance series. I did give this book 4 stars just because, one, the beginning was a little touch and go for me, and then we do get a lot of revelations about fae and kind of, you know, lore that was built and revealed at the end of this book, but I do feel like it was done just a little bit too quickly and not really constructed in a way that I think it could have been better if it was woven throughout the plot a little bit more. I just feel like there were all these things revealed at the end of the book and then characters kind of accepted it and moved on. So that's just kind of like a technical thing that I think I would have enjoyed the book a little bit more if that had changed, but I still love this book and I'm really, really excited to read the second book, which comes out this summer. And this book does have a pretty interesting cliffhanger, so I think it's going to be really exciting to see what happens between these 2 main characters and how their relationship pans out. All right, and then the one reread that I did in the month of February was House of Sky and Breath by Sarah Janet Maas. So this is my first time rereading this book. I picked this up during the Romantasy Readathon and I just kept reading it after the Romantasy Readathon ended. It was kind of like my passive read for the last few weeks of February and it was wonderful. Of course, I love this book so much. It is so much fun. This is an adult urban fantasy series and the world that Sarah has created is so rich and interesting and cool, and there are so many magical creatures in this book and I just love it. And I love Rundanen, and this book just like solidified that for me. I loved him in House of Earth and Blood, but I really, really loved him in this book. He's actually my favorite character in the series. So this was a really fun reading experience. I actually feel like Sarah's books hit better on a reread. They hit great the first time. Like I love them, 5 stars, but I really like going back and doing a reread because there's so much foreshadowing and little Easter eggs that she puts everywhere that it's so much fun to reread her books. So this was fantastic. 5 stars, obviously. And in closing, I need Crescent City 3 literally right now. All right, and the second to last book that I read in February was Mile High by Liz Tomford. This is the first book in the Windy City series, which is a sports romance companion series that takes place in Chicago. Our 2 main characters are Evan Zanders and then Stevie. Evan Zanders is a hockey player who's very notorious for being a bit of a playboy, being a bit of a diva. He actually just puts that front on though for the media. He's actually a really good guy. And so during his NHL season, his team ends up chartering a private plane that they take to all of their games. They end up having the same flight attendants on all of those flights, and Stevie is one of those flight attendants, and the 2 of them have a really fun dynamic. He's a bit of a diva, he's a little bit out there and boisterous, and Stevie throws it right back at him, which I really, really loved her. This book just had so much fun banter. The banter in this book is like top tier, and I really, really loved Liz Tomford's writing in this book. She does such a good job of rounding out characters so well. They're so fleshed out even really early on, which was fantastic. I feel like I know these characters super well, and even really early on in the book I felt that way. She did a really good job of introducing them, making them individuals, but also making their romance really, really fantastic. And I just had such a good time reading this. I'm going to be reading the second book, The Right Move, in March, and I am so excited for that. I gave this book 4 stars. It was super solid, and I'm excited to read anything from Liz Tomford in the future. All right, y'all, we made it to the end. My wrap-ups always end up being so long. I'll be curious to see how long this is once I edit it down, but it is 40 minutes thus far. I was like, I'm gonna record my wrap-up in like 20 minutes. That's not happening, so thank you if you are still here. The very last book that I read in the month of February, oh my god, was Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This was amazing. This was fantastic. That's my review. This was incredible. One of the best adult fantasies I've ever read. Vin is my everything. I love her so much. I can't say enough good things about this book. I literally, when I finished this book, teared up talking about it. And the book doesn't even end in like a sad way. I was just so overwhelmed by how much I loved the story. That is why I teared up. I was just like, did I just read that? Like, did that just really happen? Did I just experience an amazing fantasy novel? And yes, I did. This was obviously a 5-star for me. This book, if you don't know, this is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, and the Mistborn trilogy kind of begs the question of what would happen if there was a battle between good versus evil and evil won? What would the world look like and what would we do? So kind of this group of misfits team up together and they want to take down the bad guys, get the good guys back on top, and we follow 2 characters, Kelsier and then Vin. Vin's character growth in this book, her story arc, oh my god, it was just so wonderful. She's had a really hard life. She's kind of just this underworld thief, and she ends up having to sort of play these like political games at all of these balls, and she ends up finding a little bit of romance for herself, and she just grows a ton. But she's also such a badass and has this amazing magical gift. She is a Mistborn, and her and Kelsier's dynamic is really cool. This book just did me in. This book just absolutely ruined my life in the best possible way. I am so excited to keep reading. I am so excited to see what else Brandon Sanderson has in store for me. In the beginning of the book, the pacing was a little bit like off for me and I wasn't sure. I was like, oh, is this gonna be a 4-star? I don't know. But honestly, after I hit the 100-page mark, I got into a groove, and the last like 25% of this book was just like insanity and beautiful and perfect. So I loved Mistborn so much, and I'm excited to read more from Brandon Sanderson this year. Alrighty folks, we did it. That is my February wrap up. Those are all the books that I read. I would love to know down in the comments below, what was the best book you read in February and what was the worst book that you read in February? I always love seeing, like, what are you guys reading? What are you liking? Have you read anything that I recommended and you enjoyed it? I always love that. It means the world. So if you made it to this point in the video and you wanted to leave a little emoji, you can go ahead and leave a crescent moon. Crescent City, crescent moon, we have to do it. Please make sure to follow my Instagram and my Goodreads. Both are linked down below. I really appreciate that you watched this video. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. I love you guys so, so much, and I will catch you all in the next one.